Cheers.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of Between Two Pints. I'm your host Rob, and with me today is Spencer. Spencer, and actually me and Spencer, we're at Big Rock Brewery.
Yeah.
And today we're going to talk about Aleberta.
Aleberta. We're going to screen a little documentary, a documentary about the history of Alberta beer.
That is amazing. I love beer.
Beer is part of Alberta. I mean, we grow the grain.
We're in the heartland of barley. I mean, the barley we produce here in Alberta is the best in the world.
People who truly love beer are really passionate people. And I think that they don't like just the drink. They like where it comes from. They like who makes it.
Well, and it's coming from like, I've always wanted to do a beer documentary. Like, literally for the last 10 years, I've been researching a beer documentary, one pint at a time.
Well, I feel like a lot of men, especially, will be really interested in all of this, as they all are very much beer enthusiasts.
Yeah, exactly. But when I started, I really wanted to do the ultimate beer documentary, history of all beer, right? And I tried to pitch it, but it's pretty hard. And then what happened was I ended up getting a local production grant and doing something local, something small, the history of Alberta beer. And Alberta, not a lot of people know about Alberta beer.
Can you give us some tidbits?
Well, it's a pretty dense documentary. It starts in 1884.
Okay, so it goes back a ways.
It goes back a ways. Alberta's actually been through 2 prohibitions, unlike most places.
That's terrible.
Oh yeah, the Northwest Territories was the first prohibition in 1875 when the Mounties came out, and then a second prohibition in World War I. They declared another prohibition, and literally since then, the history of Alberta beer is a history of government regulation. Because since it's a prohibited substance, the more regulation you have, the more restrictive the beer community is.
Where did all of this come from? Like you said, you've always wanted to make a beer documentary. What started it? Like, how did you?
Well, I've always wanted to do it because I lived in Victoria
I'm from Victoria.
Well, and they've got some of the best beers in Victoria. Like Phillips is from there. So many great breweries. The Great Canadian Beer Festival was always an inspiration. I started reading about beer and reading the history of beer. Things like sacred herbal and healing beers, and all these different books. And I'm just like, wow, the history is so fascinating and so interesting. At the same time, looking at this, the way beer's gone. So you've got a huge corporate culture with the macro breweries.
Right.
At the same time, a revival of like small, independent, sustainable breweries that are like feeding off the bottom percentages.
So I guess, wow, I'm just so overwhelmed. This is like really exciting and cool. So how did everything start though? Did you find someone to work with, or did you just?
Well, because I've written like the grand history of beer documentary pitch before.
Okay. Oh wow.
So what I did was I just went through my old notes, and I just simplified it, and I just made it all about something local, which works really well because I'm looking at the local beer side. So I'm looking at our local history. Not the history of Canada, not the history of the world, but the history of Alberta. And when I started looking, there's not a lot of information out there. There's nothing on Wikipedia, nothing on Google. And I had to go back and track down these beer can collectors.
Beer can collectors?
No, well, they prefer a better name. The CCBA, the Canadian Collectors of Brewery Advertising.
Okay, that's a much classier name than beer can collectors.
But there's these fascinating guys that have these amazing collections of different beer cans, different beer labels, different beer advertising through history, right? And so when I started talking with those guys, because they know where all their elements come from, that's where a lot of this older history really started coming together.
That's so cool. Now, could you cover growlers? Because growlers are a big thing, and I only discovered them like a year ago.
The growler culture is insane, and it's blowing up in Alberta too. I didn't really cover that. Like Alberta's,
A sequel.
Sequel.
You should write Spencer and tell him to do it.
Yes. Alberta has had a very limited. Because if you look at BC and Alberta, right, they're very similar population bases, right? They're like 1 million more people. But in 2013, there's 100 more breweries in BC and about 12 in Alberta. So you start to try and figure out why. And it turns out there's a bunch of legislation stuff that's there. And then in 2013, at the end of 2013, they changed the legislation, and now things are changing. So at the end of 2013, there were 12 breweries. At the end of 2015, were 22. At the end of 2016, I think there's going to be about 40. So you see, like, Alberta beer culture is just exploding right now.
And you've positioned yourself to be someone who needs to go to these breweries and drink their beer.
Exactly. Well, and that was part of the problem is that, when I first started, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll just go up to Edmonton, Calgary, right? But when I get up to Edmonton, I'm like, so there's a brewery like Bench Creek, right, in Edson, which is like 2.5 hours west of Edmonton, and then a brewery, Fat Unicorn, 2.5 hours north in Lac La Biche and Plamond, and then Edgerton along the Saskatchewan border, right? So I'm sitting there in Edmonton, going like, where do I go? There's literally these like amazing, strange breweries.
In polar opposite directions.
And being a documentary filmmaker, I don't have a lot of money.
Right.
I try and get 3 interviews in a day, right? And there's no way I could cover like 2 of those guys in a day.
Yeah.
So it became really hard to pick and choose my interviews. So there's a lot of really cool breweries that I haven't been to yet, like in Fort McMurray. Fort McMurray has a brewery.
I don't know how much time we have left to talk, but what are like maybe the 3 breweries that come to mind first when you think of like ones you were fond of visiting? I don't want it like you to have to stamp your like the number, but like what are a couple that you liked?
Oh, you know what I enjoyed the most about shooting out Alberta is I would go around to these breweries and I'd talk to people about what they're passionate about. And when people talk about beer, the passion that comes from them, it's huge and it radiates right from them. And they're excited about it. So like the hardest part was at the end of it, I had 30 hours of interviews and I had to cut it down to 45 minutes. There was so much that was cut and there's so many great stories. I started doing like little separate 1-minute things just because
You didn't want to lose them.
there's so much great passion, there's so many great stories in it, right? So I just wanted to keep them all.
That's one of the reasons I thought that Between Two Pints was a good idea, is because to get people like brewing beer and things like that, it's all about passion, and like beer is a really creative thing. Like people just think, oh, it gets you drunk or whatever, but like actually no, it's like people who make beer are really like. I remember the brewmaster at Vancouver Island Brewery. It was like beer was his life.
Yeah.
Like.
Well, and there's something magical and mysterious about beer that Jim Button from Village Brewing, he told a little story about like if you're asking someone to move, right? If you're like, hey buddy, could you help me move? I'll give you $20. You're like, no, go screw yourself, right? But like, hey, could you help me move? Got some beer. I'm gonna buy some pizza. You'd be like, all right, let's do this, right? Because although it's a commodity, it becomes something more.
All right, we have 60 seconds left. So what I want to ask you is, if say like this blows up and you get $1 million to make the next chapter in Alberta, what would you do? A web series, a movie? How long would it be? What could you do?
I'm already writing it. Barley Dreams.
Dreams.
The rise of microbrewing, microdistilling, and micromalting in the heartland of barley country, set against Alberta's worst recession since the 80s.
If you need a camera operator, I work for alcohol, and I can sleep on a couch.
It's yeah.
Distilling, I love that. Actually, there's some distilleries in Vancouver that's a really neat one too.
That's the other part about Alberta that's really interesting, is that we actually grow the best barley in the world.
Wow.
Raw malting, Canada malting, now these micromalters that are coming up. We have the best barley in high altitude barley farmers in the world. So we've just been exporting our malt and buying beer back, and now we have a chance to actually sell our own beer. So
that's really great, Spencer, and thank you so much for coming on Between Two Pints. We got a lot to talk about once
Cheers.
the camera's cut.
All right.
But you guys should check it out. Now, you said that this might be online this week?
It'll be online April 15th.
All right, well, guys, it's going to be online by the time you're watching this, so there'll be a link below. But you should check out Alberta. What did you describe it as? A documentary? Ken Burns meets...
Oh,
I know, it's embarrassing.
I did at one point say it's like Ken Burns meets Errol Morris, is what I hope it would be. I hope it would be like Ken Burns meets Errol Morris.
I think that's not...
I built an Interrotron. I did. So I know Errol Morris is an Interrotron. I built an Interrotron, and I use a lot of still frame stuff like Ken Burns. I use the Ken Burns effect.
You don't have to defend yourself, Spencer. It's okay. It's going to be great, I'm sure. Guys, check it out. And thanks for joining us here. Let's chug this and
Cheers.
we can turn the cameras off.
All right.